The testing chamber reeked of sterile anxiety and poorly concealed doubt. Commander Vrell of the Carthan Dominion stood with his secondary arms crossed, his primary hands resting on the tactical belt that held more weapons than most species carried into actual combat. Around him, a dozen of the galaxy's finest military assessors watched through reinforced observation panels, their various appendages, tentacles, and sensory organs, all focused on the single human standing in the center of the arena below. Her name was Dr. Kira Vance, and she looked, quite frankly, bored. "This is foolish," Vrell muttered in Galactic Standard, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "The Terrans send us a scientist? A medical researcher? When we specifically requested combat personnel?" His aide, a nervous Quillix named Fex, adjusted his datapad with trembling claws. "Sir, the human delegation insists she meets all requirements. Her file is quite, extensive." "Extensive? In what? Bedside manner?" Vrell's voice dripped with sarcasm thick enough to swim through. "We're facing the Korthak swarm at our borders, Fex. We need warriors, not someone who can tell us our vital signs while we're being devoured." Down in the arena, Kira stretched her arms over her head, rolled her neck until it made a sound that carried through the speakers, and checked her watch. An actual mechanical watch. Not a tactical chronometer or a synced neural implant, but a piece of jewelry that told time like some sort of ancient artifact. "Begin the assessment," Vrell ordered, his tone suggesting he expected this to be over quickly. The first test was simple. Reaction time evaluation. A standard military protocol used across 47 civilized systems. 3 training drones would emerge from panels in the walls and fire harmless marker rounds at the subject. Average response time for a trained Carthan soldier was 0.7 seconds. Elite operatives could hit 0.4. The drones deployed with mechanical precision. Kira dodged the first volley before the drones finished extending from their housing. She moved like water flowing around stones, her body somehow occupying the spaces between the projectiles rather than simply avoiding them. The second volley never came close. The third barrage missed by such a margin that one of the drones actually paused, its targeting system visibly recalculating. 0.12 seconds, Fex whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sir, that's not possible." "Equipment malfunction," Vrell said flatly. "Reset and run it again." They ran it 6 more times. Kira's average response time was 0.09 seconds. She was also now sitting on one of the drones like it was a particularly uncomfortable chair, having apparently gotten tired of the whole exercise. "Perhaps something more, engaging?" she called up to the observation deck, her voice carrying that peculiar human accent that always sounded like they were half a moment from making a joke. "I've had faster reflexes needed at family dinners when my cousins visit." Vrell's mandibles ground together so hard his aide worried they might crack. "Proceed to physical stress evaluation." This test was less kind. The gravity in the chamber increased incrementally, while the subject performed a series of complex movements on an obstacle course that shifted and reconfigured itself. Most species tapped out at 3 times their home gravity. The best Carthan Marines had made it to 4.2. Earth's gravity was, according to their files, relatively low. This should be over in minutes. Kira made it to 7 times standard gravity before she even looked mildly uncomfortable. At 8, she was breathing hard but still moving with fluid grace that shouldn't have been physically possible when she weighed what must have been close to 600 pounds by that point. At 9, she stopped, placed her hands on her knees, and looked up at the observation deck. "Are we trying to train soldiers? Or make diamonds out of carbon? Because I've got to tell you, my lower back is feeling this one." "Impossible," breathed Trollocs, a Venthal combat analyst whose 3 eyes were all dilated to maximum width. "Her bone structure should have pulverized. Her circulatory system should have collapsed. She should be dead." She's a doctor, Fex offered weakly. Maybe she's, medically preventing herself from dying? That's not how medicine works, you idiot, Vrell snapped, though he couldn't quite tear his gaze away from the human who was now doing what appeared to be stretches while the chamber's gravity slowly returned to normal. The third test was psychological. A series of holographic scenarios designed to induce stress, fear, and panic. They showed the subject their worst nightmares, their deepest fears, their most painful memories, all rendered in perfect sensory detail. Kira sat through a simulation of her planet being destroyed. She watched, stone-faced, as cities burned and billions died. The AI running the program kept escalating, kept pushing, kept trying to find the breaking point. "Sir, she's not reacting," Fex said, his voice climbing with concern. "Her heart rate is actually decreasing." "She's falling asleep!" Indeed, Kira's eyes were drooping. She yawned, covering her mouth politely with one hand, while the simulation showed her the heat death of the universe. "End test," Vrell ordered. "This is clearly defective." "All systems functioning normally, Commander," the technician reported. She's just not bothered." "Everyone is bothered by something," Vrell insisted. He activated the direct communication channel. "Doctor, Vance, do you need medical attention? Are you experiencing sensory overload?" Her voice came back, cheerful and slightly amused. "Oh, is that what those nightmarish hellscapes were about? I thought it was just your species' version of art films. We've got a genre back home called horror that's way more creative than planets exploding. Ever seen a movie where a killer clown lives in a sewer? Now that's nightmare fuel." Several analysts made notes. Humans apparently found subterranean aquatic entertainers terrifying. This seemed like valuable intelligence. The fourth test was where things got interesting. They brought in a combat instructor, a Carthan veteran named Grix, who had 3 decorations for valor, 2 for tactical brilliance, and 1 for killing an enemy soldier with nothing but a broken helmet visor and pure spite. He was 7 feet of armored muscle, 4 arms of lethal precision, and he'd trained more elite operatives than most systems had soldiers. "Let's see how the human handles actual combat," Vrell said, leaning forward in his seat. Grix entered the arena, carrying a training blade in each primary hand. Carthan combat knives were slightly shorter than a human forearm, curved like a scorpion's tail, and balanced perfectly for throwing or close-quarters work. He saluted Kira with all 4 arms, a gesture of respect that honestly surprised Vrell. Kira returned the salute with a casual wave that probably would have gotten her court-martialed in any proper military. "I will test your reflexes," Grix announced, his voice like gravel being crushed by more gravel. "Defend yourself." He threw the first blade. Not at killing speed, but fast enough that a civilian should have panicked. Fast enough that most untrained beings would have stumbled backward, maybe screamed, definitely not tried to catch it. Kira's hand moved in a blur. She caught the knife by its edge, the blade stopping a millimeter from her palm, held between her thumb and fingers, like she was picking up a delicate piece of paper. She didn't look at the blade. Her eyes stayed locked on Grix. And then she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a relieved smile. A smile that said she'd just figured out the punchline to a joke that Grix hadn't realized he was telling. The observation deck went silent. Grix threw the second blade. Faster. Much faster. Kira caught it the same way, her other hand moving with the same casual precision. Now she held both knives, one in each hand, and she was still smiling. "You want these back?" she asked politely. "Or should I hold on to them for a bit?" Grix's mandibles opened slightly in what might have been shock or respect, or possibly the Carthan equivalent of saying, "You've got to be kidding me." He drew 2 more blades from his tactical belt. "She's going to get hurt," Fex whispered. "Sir, should we stop this?" "She caught knives by the edge, Fex. Knives. By the edge. I want to see what else she can do." Vrell's voice had lost its sarcasm and gained something else. Something that might have been respect, or might have been fear, or might have been both. Grix and Kira began to move. To call it sparring would have been insulting. It was more like watching two different philosophies of violence having a polite conversation. Grix was all precise angles and calculated strikes, 4 arms working in perfect coordination to create a web of steel that should have been impossible to penetrate. Kira flowed through his attacks like smoke through a fence. She didn't block, she redirected. She didn't dodge, she simply wasn't where the blades were. And every few exchanges, she'd tap him lightly with the flat of one of the training knives, just hard enough to make it clear she could have struck for real. After 2 minutes, Grix stepped back, breathing hard, all 4 arms trembling slightly with exertion. Kira wasn't even sweating. "You have combat training," Grix said. It wasn't a question. "I'm a trauma surgeon," Kira replied, flipping the knives in her hands and offering them back hilt first. "You learn a lot about anatomy when you spend your days putting people back together. You learn even more when you spend time taking different species apart in medical school." Cadaver Lab was very educational. The way she said it, so casually, so cheerfully, made several analysts shudder. "How long have you trained in combat?" Vrell demanded through the speakers. Kira looked up at the observation deck, shielding her eyes from the lights. "Combat? Not much formal training, really, but I grew up with 4 older brothers and played rugby for 6 years. Does that count?" "What's rugby?" Vex asked. No one had an answer. Grix spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that silenced everyone. "I would be honored to train with you, Dr. Vance. You move like you understand death intimately." "Well, I do work in the emergency department," Kira said. "You get to know death pretty well when you're racing it for people's lives several times a day." She paused, then added with that strange human humor, "Death's got a pretty good record, but I've stolen quite a few wins from the old skeleton." She refers to death as a skeleton, an analyst noted. "Possibly a religious or cultural symbol? Or they're all insane," Vrell muttered. But he kept watching. The 5th test was marksmanship. They gave Kira a standard Carthan plasma rifle, a weapon designed for their 4-armed physiology and considered difficult for most 2-armed species to even hold properly. She shouldered it, adjusted the sight with one hand, and proceeded to score perfect hits on every target. Moving targets, targets in low visibility, targets that shot back with marker rounds, targets hidden behind cover. Perfect. Every single shot. "Sir," Vex said quietly. "Her file says she specializes in microsurgery, hand-eye coordination at the cellular level." "That explains the shooting," Tralix observed. "But it doesn't explain the rest." Vrell didn't respond. He was too busy recalculating everything he thought he knew about humans. The 6th test. They decided to skip entirely. It was endurance running, and after watching Kira move for the past 3 hours without showing signs of fatigue, no one wanted to waste time confirming what they already suspected. The 7th test was problem-solving under pressure, a tactical simulation where the subject had to defend a position against overwhelming enemy forces with limited resources and no backup. Most military officers focused on holding the position as long as possible, racking up enemy casualties and trying to survive until reinforcement arrived. Kira looked at the scenario for exactly 12 seconds, then disabled the enemy's entire command structure with a series of precisely targeted strikes that shouldn't have been possible with the equipment she'd been given. She then used the confusion to stage a false retreat that lured the enemy into a kill zone of their own making, turned their weapons against them, and secured not just the position, but 3 additional strategic locations in the process. The simulation ended with her having suffered 0 casualties and captured the enemy commander. Elapsed time was 4 minutes, 32 seconds. The current record had been 27 minutes, held by a Venthal tactical genius who died of old age 3 centuries ago after writing 15 volumes on military strategy. Is she cheating? someone asked. Can someone check if she's cheating? The simulation is cheat-proof, the technician replied. She's very good at pattern recognition and exploiting systemic weaknesses. She's a doctor, Vrell practically shouted. How does a doctor know advanced military tactics? Through the speaker, Kira's voice came back. You try running a level 1 trauma center during a major disaster and tell me you don't learn triage, resource allocation, and tactical coordination under pressure. Plus, I spent a year volunteering in a war zone when I was younger. Doctors Without Borders. You see things. You learn things. The 8th and final test was the one that would seal humanity's fate in the galactic community. Combat assessment against multiple opponents using live weapons with lethal force authorized. Sir, this is too dangerous, Vex protested. She's done well, but this is actual combat. People die in this test, regularly. Then we'll finally see the limits of human capability, Vrell said, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. They sent in 5 combat veterans, not training instructors, not simulation specialists, 5 soldiers who'd fought in real battles, killed real enemies, and survived real wars. They carried live weapons. They had orders to treat this as actual combat. Kira requested a medical kit before the test began. Planning to patch yourself up? Grix asked, having stayed to watch. Planning to patch them up? Kira replied, nodding toward the 5 soldiers entering the arena. I'm a doctor. I took an oath. Do no harm, remember? They're trying to kill you, Vex pointed out through the speaker. They're trying to test me, Kira corrected. There's a difference. A pretty important one, actually. The test began. What happened next would be analyzed by military strategists for the next 50 years. Kira moved through the 5 soldiers like she was performing surgery, precise, efficient, and disturbingly calm. She disarmed the first one with a joint lock that made everyone watching wince. The second lost his weapon to a throw that shouldn't have been possible with human muscle structure. The third, fourth, and fifth went down in quick succession through a combination of leverage, momentum, and what could only be described as an intimate understanding of how every species in the galaxy was put together. None of them were permanently injured. All of them were conscious. All of them were lying on the floor wondering what had just happened. The entire engagement lasted 43 seconds. Kira then proceeded to treat their minor injuries with the medical kit she'd requested, chatting pleasantly about proper stretching techniques to avoid muscle tears and asking if anyone needed water, because dehydration was a serious concern in combat situations. She defeated 5 elite soldiers, Tralix said slowly, and is now giving them medical advice. She's teaching them, Grix corrected, watching through the observation panel. Watch. She's showing them what she did and how to counter it. She's turning a combat assessment into a training session. And indeed, Kira was demonstrating on one of the soldiers exactly how she'd executed each move, encouraging them to practice the counters, offering suggestions on improving their guard. Vrell stood from his seat. His mandibles worked silently for a moment before he could find words. Bring her up here, now. 5 minutes later, Kira Vance stood in the observation deck, looking slightly disheveled but entirely unbothered by the fact that she'd just exceeded every military standard the galaxy had by margins that shouldn't exist. Dr. Vance? Vrell began, then paused. That is your actual title? You're genuinely a medical doctor? Board certified in emergency medicine and trauma surgery, Kira confirmed. Would you like to see my credentials? I've got my diplomas on my datapad. That won't be necessary. Vrell's voice was quieter now, thoughtful. You understand why we're confused? Because I'm not a soldier, Kira said. Yeah, I get it. But here's the thing you need to understand about humans, Commander. She leaned against the observation panel, her posture relaxed. We don't really separate our roles the way most species do. A doctor learns to fight because sometimes patients get violent. A scientist learns tactics because research requires strategy. A teacher learns to survive because protecting students means being dangerous when necessary. But you exceeded every combat metric we have, Vex protested. You're better than our best soldiers. I'm really not, Kira said seriously. Your soldiers are trained for war. I'm trained to save lives. It just turns out that understanding how to put things together means you understand how to take them apart. And growing up human means you learn to adapt, survive, and overcome whatever the universe throws at you. Because our planet spent millions of years trying to kill us, and we're still here, so we got pretty good at not dying. There was a long silence. Finally, Grix spoke. How many like you does Terra have? Kira thought about it. Doctors? Millions. People with my specific skill set? Thousands, probably, but people who could pass your tests? She smiled that same unsettling smile she'd given when catching the blade. Commander, you asked for one qualified human. We sent a doctor. If you'd asked for a soldier, we would have sent someone truly frightening. The implication hung in the air like a guillotine blade. What do you mean? Vrell asked quietly. Kira's smile widened. I save lives for a living, Commander. It's literally my job to prevent death. Now, imagine what someone could do if their job was the opposite. If instead of being trained to heal, they were trained to harm. If instead of studying medicine, they studied war. If instead of taking an oath to do no harm, they took an oath to protect humanity at any cost. She let that sink in. We sent you a healer, Commander, someone whose entire existence is dedicated to preserving life. And she caught your blade, defeated your soldiers, and exceeded every metric you have for combat effectiveness. So, here's my question for you. Kira's expression became serious, her voice dropping to something that made everyone in the room suddenly remember that humans were technically apex predators. What do you think we'll send when we need to send a warrior? Nobody had an answer for that. They didn't need one. The silence said everything. Commander Vrell found himself doing something he hadn't done in 20 cycles of military service. He was nervous. 3 days had passed since Kira's assessment. 3 days of emergency council meetings, frantic communications with the Carthan High Command, and increasingly uncomfortable conversations with representatives from 40 different species who all wanted to know the same thing. What exactly were humans? The Terran delegation has arrived, Vex announced, his claws trembling slightly as he adjusted his ceremonial sash. They're requesting permission to dock. How many ships? Vrell asked, already dreading the answer. 1, sir. A diplomatic transport. No weapons signatures. Crew complement of 12. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. The docking bay was prepared with full military honors, which now felt less like respect and more like a desperate attempt to appear civilized. Vrell stood at attention with his command staff, watching as the human vessel completed its approach with the kind of casual precision that suggested whoever was piloting could probably dock blindfolded while juggling. The airlock cycled. The door opened. Ambassador Marcus Webb stepped through first, and Vrell immediately understood why humans had survived long enough to reach the stars. The man moved with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was and had precisely zero need to prove it. He was shorter than Kira, broader in the shoulders, and his eyes held the kind of calm assessment that marked professional soldiers across every species. Behind him came 11 others, not diplomats, not scientists, soldiers. Every single one of them carried themselves with that same quiet competence that made Vrell's combat instincts start screaming warnings. Commander Vrell, Ambassador Webb said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. His galactic standard was flawless. Thank you for the invitation. I understand you've had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Vance? Vrell accepted the handshake, noting the carefully controlled strength in Webb's grip. Not a threat. A statement. Your doctor made quite an impression, Ambassador. Several impressions, actually. Kira does tend to overachieve, Webb agreed with a slight smile. Probably why we sent her. Nothing says, humanity wants to help quite like someone who's spent the last decade saving lives in the worst conditions imaginable. They moved to the council chamber, a massive room designed to accommodate the Carthan High Command and their various allies. Today, it held military leaders from 17 different systems, all of whom had wanted to observe this meeting. All of whom were now watching the humans with varying degrees of suspicion, fascination, and poorly concealed fear. Kira was already there, somehow having acquired a cup of something steaming that smelled vaguely toxic. She waved cheerfully at Webb. "Hey, Marcus! They've got this interesting fungal beverage here that's technically poisonous to humans, but makes excellent fertilizer for my office plants. Please don't drink the poison, Kira," Webb said without missing a beat. "It's not poison if you don't swallow it," she replied reasonably. "I'm just smelling it." Very educational. This exchange, casual and bizarre, somehow made everyone in the room more nervous. Vrell activated the chamber's primary holographic display. "Ambassador Webb, we've reviewed Dr. Vance's assessment results extensively. Her performance was unprecedented across every metric we use to evaluate military capability." "Kira's quite talented," Webb agreed mildly. "She exceeded our best soldiers by margins that shouldn't be physically possible," Tralix added, his three eyes narrowing. "She defeated 5 combat veterans in under a minute without causing permanent injury, then provided them with medical treatment and tactical instruction." "That sounds like Kira," Webb said. "She's always been good at multitasking." Grix leaned forward, all 4 arms resting on the table. "Ambassador, with respect, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Your species requests membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition. You offer military support against the Korthax swarm, but you send us a doctor who fights like our finest warriors without breaking a growl, sweat. This seems contradictory." Webb's expression became thoughtful. He glanced at his team, received a series of subtle nods, and turned back to the assembly. "You're right. It is contradictory. But that's because you're operating under incorrect assumptions about human capability and specialization." He stood, moving to the holographic display. With a gesture, he brought up an image of Earth, blue and green and white, spinning peacefully in the void. "This is our home. Beautiful, right? Looks peaceful. Hospitable." Webb's tone suggested the punchline was coming. "It's a death trap. Terra spent 4 billion years trying to murder everything living on its surface. Volcanoes, ice ages, meteor impacts, supervolcanoes, magnetic pole reversals, mass extinctions. 5 separate times, our planet killed over 70% of all life." He pulled up another image, a creature that looked like it had been designed by a nightmare committee. "Humans aren't the strongest species Earth produced. We're not the fastest. We're not the most venomous, the most armored, or the most dangerous in direct combat. We're the species that survived everything else." Webb's smile was sharp. "We survived by being adaptable, relentless, and absolutely refusing to accept extinction as an outcome." Another image appeared. Human children, laughing and playing. "We teach our young to run before they can walk properly. We tell them stories about monsters to prepare them for danger. We create games that simulate hunting, fighting, and strategic thinking. Our entertainment industry is built around simulated conflict because we find it relaxing." "Relaxing?" Fex squeaked. "Relaxing," Webb confirmed. "Doctor, Vance mentioned horror films. We create media specifically designed to trigger fear responses, and we consume it voluntarily for fun. We climb mountains that kill people regularly. We dive to ocean depths that can crush submarines. We jump out of perfectly functional aircraft with fabric parachutes, because the adrenaline feels good." The council chamber had gone very quiet. "Every human learns basic combat skills in childhood," Webb continued. "Not because we're militaristic, but because our history is full of predators, enemies, and disasters that required fighting back. Self-defense isn't a military skill for us. It's a life skill. Like learning to swim or ride a bicycle. He gestured to Kira. Dr. Vance is an emergency medicine specialist. Her job requires her to make life or death decisions in seconds, perform complex procedures under extreme stress, and maintain perfect hand control while exhausted, terrified, and covered in blood. Her physical conditioning comes from working 30-hour shifts in trauma centers where people are actively dying. Her combat awareness comes from treating victims of violence in places where the violence was still happening. Kira raised her mug slightly in acknowledgement. I once performed a thoracic surgery in the back of a moving ambulance during a firefight. Really concentrates the mind. She's not a soldier, Webb emphasized. She's what humans become when we specialize in saving lives. Now, let me show you what humans become when we specialize in taking them. He nodded to one of his team members, a woman named Captain Yara Okonkwo, who'd been silent until now. She stood with fluid grace, moved to the center of the chamber, and looked at Grix. Master Grix, I understand you're the finest combat instructor in the Carthan military, Okonkwo said politely. Would you be willing to demonstrate your capabilities for the council? No contact, just forms and technique display. Grix's mandibles clicked with interest. I would be honored, Captain. What followed was a demonstration of Carthan martial prowess that reminded everyone present why they were considered among the galaxy's premier warriors. Grix moved through combat forms with four-armed precision, demonstrating strikes, blocks, counters, and combinations that had been refined over thousands of years of warfare. It was impressive, beautiful even, deadly efficient. When he finished, the council applauded respectfully. Thank you, Master Grix, Okonkwo said. That was excellent. Now, if you'll permit me? She didn't wait for permission. She simply moved. If Kira had fought like water, Okonkwo fought like lightning. Her demonstration wasn't just faster than Grix's, it operated on a completely different level of violence. Every movement was designed to kill. Not disable, not capture, not subdue. Kill. Quickly, efficiently, and with absolute certainty. She moved through forms from a dozen different human martial arts, each one more lethal than the last. Strikes that would crush windpipes, locks that would snap bones, throws that would break necks, pressure points that would stop hearts. And then, she drew a knife. The blade work that followed made several council members leave the room. Not because it was gory, there was no actual violence, but because watching someone demonstrate that level of lethal expertise was fundamentally disturbing. Okonkwo made it clear, without touching anyone, that she could kill every person in the room before they could draw a weapon. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Captain Okonkwo is not our best soldier, Webb said quietly. She's one of approximately 2 million humans with her level of training. She's what we send when diplomacy isn't sufficient. He pulled up another file. This is Master Sergeant Thomas Wright, graduated top of his class in advanced tactics, survived 3 separate planetary conflicts, expert in 27 weapon systems and 41 forms of unarmed combat. He's specialized in search and extraction operations in hostile environments. Another file. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bowen, Naval Special Operations, Deep Space Insertion Expert. She's spent more time in zero-gravity combat than most species spend in space, period. File after file, soldier after soldier. Each one more capable than the last. We have approximately 500 million humans in active military service, Webb said. Another 2 billion in reserve forces who maintain combat readiness, and a civilian population of 16 billion who all receive basic combat training as part of standard education. The numbers were staggering. But here's what you need to understand, Webb continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. We didn't come here to threaten you. We came because the Korthax swarm is approaching your borders, and we've seen what they do to civilizations that can't defend themselves. We've lost colonies to them. We've fought them for 20 years across a dozen systems, and we're offering to help, because that's what humans do. Vrell finally found his voice. Why? Why help us? What do you gain? Allies, Webb said simply. Friends, trading partners, cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, and the satisfaction of knowing we prevented another species from being devoured by an existential threat. Is that not sufficient reason? Most species would demand territory, resources, preferential trade agreements. Tralix observed suspiciously. Most species aren't human, Kira interjected. Look, Commander, it's not complicated. We were alone in our system for thousands of years. We fought each other constantly because we didn't have anyone else to fight. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. Nuclear weapons, biological warfare, environmental collapse, you name it, we almost died from it. She set down her mug. Then we reached the stars and found out we weren't alone. That there were thousands of other species out here, all trying to survive, all facing their own threats. And we realized something important. The universe is dangerous enough without us fighting each other. So yeah, we'll help. Because we've been where you are, and we know how terrifying it is. The Korthax swarm will reach your outer colonies in 6 months, Webb said, pulling up tactical displays. Based on their current trajectory and expansion patterns, they'll hit your primary defensive line in 18 months. You have excellent soldiers, strong fortifications, and good strategic planning. But you're facing an enemy that doesn't negotiate, doesn't retreat, and doesn't care about casualties. He highlighted several sectors. We can provide military advisors, combat specialists, and tactical support. We can share our weapons technology, our defensive strategies, and our experience fighting the swarm. We can put human soldiers on your front lines if you want them. Or we can train your forces in our methods and let you handle it yourselves. Why would you fight our war? Grix asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Because if we don't, it becomes our war anyway when the swarm finishes with you and moves to the next system, Okonkwo answered. We've learned that lesson the hard way. Better to stop threats before they reach critical mass. Vrell looked at the tactical displays, at the human soldiers standing calmly around the room, at Kira, who was back to smelling her toxic beverage with scientific interest. He thought about the assessment results, the impossible performances, the casual demonstration of capabilities that exceeded everything his civilization had achieved in warfare. And he thought about the alternative, facing the Korthax swarm alone. What would your assistance look like, specifically? He asked. Webb pulled up a new file. We're proposing a joint task force, combined human and Carthan command structure. We provide tactical advisors, special operations units, and technological support. You provide local knowledge, defensive infrastructure, and the bulk of conventional forces. We train together, plan together, and fight together. You would place your soldiers under Carthan command? Tralix asked skeptically. Under joint command? Webb corrected. We're not here to take over, we're here to help. That means partnership, not subordination, on either side. The council members began talking among themselves, their various languages creating a chaotic symphony of debate. Vrell watched them, then looked back at Webb. Your doctor mentioned something during her assessment, Vrell said quietly. She said, if we'd asked for a soldier, you would have sent someone truly frightening. Was she exaggerating? Webb's expression became unreadable. Master Sergeant Thomas Wright holds the human record for longest confirmed combat engagement. He fought continuously for 73 hours against Korthax forces during the siege of New Hebron, killed over 300 enemy combatants, saved 2,000 civilians, did it all with a broken arm and internal bleeding. He paused. That's not our most frightening soldier. That's just the one whose records are declassified. Dr. Vance wasn't exaggerating, Commander. She was being optimistic. The debate in the council chamber died down. Slowly, The representatives began to nod. "We need time to discuss this formally," Vrell said. "But speaking personally, I believe humanity's assistance would be valuable. More than valuable. Necessary. Take all the time you need," Webb said. "But the swarm won't wait for bureaucracy. Every day we delay is ground they gain." 1 week, Vrell decided. "We'll have an answer in 1 week." Webb nodded. "Fair enough. In the meantime, Dr. Vance has offered to provide medical training to your field medics. She thinks she can reduce your combat mortality rates by about 40%, with some basic triage updates." 50%, if they'll let me redesign their trauma kits, Kira added. "No offense, but your medical supplies are organized by whoever packed them last, and that person apparently hated efficiency." Despite everything, despite the tension and fear and uncertainty, Vrell found himself making the clicking sound that was Carthon laughter. "Your doctor is very confident," he observed. "She has to be," Webb replied. "Confidence is required when you're racing death for people's lives. Speaking of which, Kira, show them the thing." Kira brightened, reaching into her medical bag. She pulled out what looked like a small handheld device. "This is a portable cellular regenerator. Human technology. About 5 years old. It can close most wounds in under 2 minutes, prevent infection, and start healing deep tissue damage. We've got about 5,000 of them we can spare if you want them." She demonstrated on a piece of synthetic flesh, showing how the device worked. The council watched in fascination as the simulated wound sealed itself in seconds. "This technology could save millions of lives," a medical officer breathed. "That's the idea," Kira said. "We figured if we're going to fight together, we should probably try to keep each other alive. Call me sentimental, but I prefer my allies breathing." The week passed quickly. Vrell spent most of it reviewing combat footage, reading human military history, and having increasingly surreal conversations with his staff about whether humans were secretly terrifying or just aggressively helpful. "I think they might be both," Vex concluded, after watching Kira teach a class on emergency amputation techniques while cheerfully discussing her favorite restaurants. "They're frightening because they're helpful. They've turned survival into an art form." On the 7th day, the council reconvened. The vote was unanimous. The Carthon Dominion would accept humanity's assistance. Ambassador Webb took the news with professional grace, though Vrell noticed the slight relaxation in his shoulders. The man had been genuinely worried they'd refuse. "We'll begin coordination immediately," Webb said. "First priority is getting our military advisors integrated with your command structure. Second is technology transfer for medical and defensive systems. Third is joint training exercises so our forces learn to work together." "And the swarm?" Vrell asked. "We've already deployed long-range reconnaissance units to your border systems," Okonkwo said. "Human ships, human crews, keeping an eye on Korthak's movements. If they accelerate their timeline, we'll know immediately." "You deployed military assets before we agreed to the alliance?" Tralek sputtered. "We deployed scouts to gather intelligence on a mutual threat," Webb corrected smoothly. "Whether you allied with us or not, the swarm is still a problem. We just prefer to know what we're dealing with. Knowledge saves lives." It was hard to argue with that logic. Over the following months, the alliance took shape. Human advisors integrated seamlessly with Carthon command structures. Technology transfers began, carefully managed to respect both species' security concerns. Training exercises revealed strengths and weaknesses on both sides, leading to doctrine updates that improved everyone's capabilities. And slowly, the two civilizations began to understand each other. Humans learned that Carthon honor culture valued directness and competence above all else, that their four-armed physiology gave them advantages in multitasking that humans couldn't match, that their society had spent millennia refining the art of warfare into something approaching philosophy. Carthons learned that humans were simultaneously the most helpful and most dangerous species they'd ever encountered. That their adaptability wasn't just physical but cultural, allowing them to integrate with alien societies with unsettling ease. That their refusal to give up, ever, under any circumstances, made them both inspiring and slightly unhinged. Dr. Kira Vance became something of a legend. She trained medical staff, updated trauma protocols, and somehow found time to lecture on comparative xenobiology at the Carthan Military Academy. Her classes were always full, partly because she was brilliant, and partly because watching her casually discuss dismemberment techniques while eating lunch was both educational and deeply disturbing. When the Korthax swarm finally reached Carthan space, 6 months ahead of schedule, they found something unexpected. They found humans. And humans, as the swarm was about to learn, were very good at making problems go away. The first battle was brutal. Korthax forces hit a border colony with overwhelming numbers, expecting easy prey. Instead, they ran into joint human-Carthan defensive positions that had been prepared for months. The swarm learned that human weapons technology was frighteningly effective, that human tactical doctrine emphasized mobility and adaptability over static defense, that human soldiers fought with a combination of professional skill and personal fury that made them extraordinarily dangerous. But most importantly, the swarm learned that humans didn't fight alone. They fought beside their allies, for their allies, and sometimes, instead of their allies, when the situation demanded sacrifice. The battle lasted 3 days. The colony held. And when it was over, human and Carthan soldiers stood together over the ruins, exhausted and bloodied, but victorious. Commander Vrell found Ambassador Webb in the aftermath, both of them covered in dust and looking like they'd aged a decade. "Your people fought well," Vrell said simply. "So did yours," Webb replied. "That's what happens when you fight for something that matters." "What happens now?" Webb looked out at the damaged but intact colony, at the civilians being evacuated to safety, at the human and Carthan medics working side by side to save the wounded. "Now we do it again," he said, "and again, and as many times as it takes until the swarm learns that this sector is defended, that attacking here means facing not just one species, but 2, that we stand together." Vrell clicked his mandibles in agreement. They threw a blade to test Dr. Vance's reflexes, and she caught it by the edge and smiled. Webb finished. "Yeah, that's humanity in a nutshell. We catch the things that should kill us, and we smile while doing it, because we've been catching blades for millions of years, Commander. It's what we do." Far above them, in the orbital stations that protected the colony, Dr. Kira Vance was already back at work. Emergency surgery on a Carthan soldier who'd taken shrapnel to 3 of his 4 arms. The operation was delicate, complex, and required perfect precision. She worked for 6 hours straight, never wavering, never hesitating. When she finished, the soldier would make a full recovery. All 4 arms functional, back to active duty in a month. As she closed the final incision, Kira allowed herself a small smile. Not because the surgery was difficult, not because she'd saved another life, but because she'd proven, once again, that humans were very good at 2 things: breaking what needed to be broken, and fixing what needed to be saved. And in a galaxy full of threats, species that could do both were exactly what everyone needed, even if they were absolutely terrifying.